The Solar Temple, or the Order of the Solar Temple in French, is a notorious religious group, founded under the banner of the Knights Templars principles. Created by Louis Jouret and Joseph de Mombro in 1984 in Switzerland, this group became infamous due to a series of killings and mass suicides that took the lives of 77 people across Switzerland, France, and Canada between 1994 and 1997, triggering a massive controversy that eventually intensified anti-cult measures in France. One of the founders, Joseph de Mombro, also known as Joe, had a history of fraudulent activities. He was once employed as a jeweler specializing in gold processing before serving time in prison for deception. In the mid-20th century, he started dabbling in spiritualism and got involved with a group linked to the Service d'Action Civique, SAC. Established by French politician Charles Pasqua by the late 60s, he became part of the ancient mystical order Rose-Croix in L'Étalage in Nimes, France. In 1973, de Mombro established the Center for the Preparation of the New Age in College, Sous Célève. 2 years later, a Geneva-based group called the Brotherhood of the Pyramid began organizing meetings in a rural house in the same city, focused on community building and discussion of topics like healthful eating and spirituality. Michel Tabachnik, an orchestral conductor and member of this group, met de Mombro in 1977. De Mombro suggested that Tabachnik take the reins of the community and organized it further. In 1978, de Mombro and Tabachnik founded the Golden Way Foundation, of which Tabachnik became president. The foundation, seated in a villa in Saconnex, Darvé, Switzerland, aimed at addressing the evolution of quality of life through the promotion of ecological sustainability, healthy living, organic farming, and holistic health approaches. The organization's contribution to public discourse was through hosting conferences with notable guests, conducting research, and utilizing television interviews to spread their messaging. In the early 1980s, the two men, deeply interested in philosophy, esotericism, and spirituality, decided to infuse the foundation with occult elements. They established a room named the Sanctuary, designated for meditation and rituals that aimed to connect with the world of the invisible. Members adorned themselves in white capes featuring symbolic emblems such as the Rose Cross and the Templar Cross. Simultaneously, de Mombro immersed himself in the refurbished spiritual sect, Order of the Temple, also known as ORT. This revival of the Ordo Templi Orientis was founded in 1968 by ex-Rosicrucians. In 1983, upon the demise of ORT's leader Julian Origas, de Mombro astutely suggested for Jouret to step up as the Grand Master, and he ascended to this role during the same year. However, he would later be ejected by Origas's kin. This new leadership caused a divide, birthing a splinter faction, the International Chivalric Order of the Solar Tradition, led by Jouret himself. In the previous year, de Mombro had foretold of a grand endeavor that was to commence with the birth of a destined child king. He soon concluded that a member named Dominique Belleton, a young woman battling a drug problem, would birth this prophesied offspring. Through a meticulously orchestrated ceremony in the hideout, de Mombro convinced his followers of a miraculous birth, one untouched by carnal relations. Meanwhile, Belleton was, in fact, his hidden paramour and already pregnant. Their offspring, named Emanuele, but also referred to as Chris, implying their perceived harbinger of Christ, was born on March 22, 1982. In 1984, the Golden Way Foundation and International Chivalric Order of the Solar Tradition merged, forming the Order of the Solar Temple. This flagship organization amalgamated teachings from the previous groups and was comprised of several French-speaking members. Jouret emerged as the face of the organization, the Grand Master, while the real powerhouse was de Mombro. On a surface level, the organization espoused ideas of esotericism and occultism, advocating certain practices unrecognized by conventional religions or science. Its proclaimed mission was to herald the return of Christ in solar glory. In preparation for a post-nuclear world, de Mombro in 1985 established a survival haven in Canada. They bought an estate named Sacré-Cœur in Quebec and developed an organic farm. The funding was managed through various official and clandestine suborganizations, which proved profitable for de Mombro. Real estate purchases, including semi-detached chalets, other houses for sect activities, were bought with members' money by key players such as de Mombro, Jouret, Belleton, and Camille Pilot. In 1986, Antonio Dutuit, a member of the Aughts cult, pointed out the hubris, duplicity, and fraudulence of the group's leaders, highlighting Joseph de Mombro's manipulative actions disguised under lavish living that contradicted the cult's teachings. Due to it, accused the leaders of deceitful displays of magic during rituals. These revelations prompted several members and donors to seek partial refunds of their investments, which had been misappropriated for personal luxuries or pumped into sham companies controlled by the founders as a result. Many members left the group whilst de Mombro managed to retain only his most loyal followers. Upon entering the 1990s, Luc Jouret, a dedicated servant of the Oates, began talks on personal growth in various educational and commercial establishments across Canada, Switzerland, France, and Belgium. However, de Mombro cynically viewed these lectures as a public expose of the cult's principles and plotted against Jouret's initiatives as a consequence. Jouret relinquished his activities and his influential position within the group. Back in Europe, core members of the cult purchased properties and set up new communal living arrangements. The cult's activities, however, faced crackdowns due to illegal weapon possession in Canada, which raised legal and media scrutiny that they perceived as a conspiracy against them and an indication of impending disaster in response. De Mombro adjusted his teaching narrative and proposed a migration to another planet, suggesting that Ots leaders would disappear on the star Sirius. This declaration sparked surveillance on members intending to leave and saw an exodus of several key individuals, including de Mombro's son. Down under in Australia, the cult attempted to suggest a mass suicide event in Sydney in early 1994, a claim subsequently dismissed by the local police as baseless. The story arc of the Ots portrays a classic tale of cult manipulation, paranoia, and eventual disintegration. The story centers around an order in which their members were indoctrinated during elaborate ceremonies at every progression level. These rites involved extravagant purchases, including regalia, jewelry, and costs, as well as the payment of initiation fees. 292. Members adorned themselves in crusader-like attire during these ceremonies and revered a sword, which de Mombro claimed was an authentic Templar artifact presented to him in a past life. 1 millennium ago, the order possessed an unchallenged hierarchy. 26-member Tony Dutuit supposedly orchestrated these ritualistic ceremonies. The worship areas, according to the 2001 judgment of Michael Tabachnik, were sites of supernatural visions and occurrences during these ritualistic ceremonies. Moreover, numerous witnesses reported seeing materialized objects or figures. An ex-adept has reported witnessing the revelation of spiritual figures such as the Masters, the Holy Grail, the Sword Excalibur, the 12 Apostles, and even Christ. These so-called supernatural visions, however, were coupled with a cacophonous cosmic musical score and holograms, and were merely theatrical exhibitions by Jocelyn de Mombro, the wife of de Mombro, elevated on a stool in sociologist Francois Champion's perspective. The organization possessed a patched-up Templar lineage. Jean-Francois Meyer provides an explanation of the sect's beliefs, including notions like the transit or the transmission of life to another planet via suicidal methods, a principle similar to the Heaven's Gate cult. Accusations of subsequent distortions were often linked back to these ideologies. Many ideas proposed by the order were drawn from the Hermetic writings of Tabachnik, the Archies. This faction is a fraction of the Neo-Templar epoch that traces its roots back to Grand Masters dated back to the medieval Order of the Temple, a notion labeled utterly ludicrous by historian Regin Pernaut. Also notable is the order's presence in Spain, and especially in the Canary Islands. Luc Jouret held a discourse in Tenerife in 1984. A local barber was the only Spaniard to die in the order's mass suicide. The group was also suspected of planning a ritual suicide in Tenerife's Teide National Park in 1998. Both German and Spanish police initially tied the sect to the Order of the Solar Temple. Jacques Breyer, a French author who formed a sovereign order of the Solar Temple in 1952, also influenced this group. 297. Given the scale of challenges, the decision was made to transit to Sirius. To prepare for this movie, Joseph de Mombro tasked the most loyal members with special missions. This preparation was executed in stages, including members who agreed with the principle of transit, but not necessarily physical death, and members who agreed with the principle of transit and accepted physical death. An eerily dark tale unfolded in Switzerland during the night of October 4th to 5th, 1994, when two separate fires occurred. one in a farmhouse named La Rochette in Cherry and the other across 3 chalets named La Fond du Ban and Salvin. The incidents resulted in harrowing loss, with the discovery of 23 charred bodies in Cherry and a further 25 in Salvin. Intriguingly, the victims were draped in ritualistic cloaks varying in the colors of white, black, or gold, denoting their level of initiation within mysterious underground Templar Mark Chapel. Notably among the victims were the bodies of Jurate and Dimambro, unearthed amidst the ruins of Salvin and identified solely through dental records. An additional part of this perplexing storyline saw Dimambro issuing directives to Patrick Fournet to dispatch 300 pieces of mail to various media houses, followers, politicians, and public figures, including Charles Pasqua. On the morning of October 5th, 4 of the letters, dubbed testaments, were addressed to scholars, journalists, and government officials, outlining their cryptic order's beliefs. Further examination of the departed revealed incriminating evidence of planned coercion. 20 victims had gunshot wounds to the head, while 2 others suffocated to death with plastic bags covering their heads. One victim probably met a similar fate in a separate incident. On October 3rd, autopsy results indicated the presence of a sedative flunitrazepam in the blood of 22 victims, with 1 testing positive for their obrumate. The bodies, adorned in ceremonial robes of the order, were found circled in a peculiar formation, suggesting ritualistic proceedings. Some bodies found were categorized into groups such as the awakened, who consumed poison, the immortals, who were shot or smothered, and the traitors, who were brutally murdered. Investigations suggested the victims were drugged before they met their dismal end. In Salvin, notably, substances found were indicative of lethal injections of curare, opioids, and benzodiazepines. The macabre discovery involved individuals from various professional backgrounds, including a mayor, a journalist, a civil servant, and a sales manager. Documents seized from the scene revealed that members had donated substantial amounts, upwards of $1 million, to Dimambro. This twisted narrative was tied to seasonal transitions and the group's beliefs, with the grim sequence of suicides murders coinciding with equinox and solstice dates. The victims left behind letters revealing their belief of escaping the world's hypocrisies and oppression in a flight towards celestial entity Sirius. The story centers around a sinister plot believed to be a mass assassination ploy, intending to claim the lives of 54 individuals, a number tied to the lore of the executed order of the Temple's Knights under Philip IV of France's reign. Some surviving sect members expressed their allegiance to the cult's ideals, even expressing regret for being overlooked for the supposed transit. Controversy erupted over whether the event was a mass suicide or a horrifying mass murder. Ultimately, the investigations concluded it was a coordinated mass suicide by Dimambro and Luc Jurette. Discovery of a protest note at Dimambro's residence added another shocking layer to the narrative. The note, representing the Rosy Cross, unequivocally condemned Juret's vile actions, describing them as barbaric and a transgression of their code of honor. The discovery painted his act as a relentless massacre contrary to their honor-based belief of a peaceful and respectful transit. A chilling event transpired on the night of December 15, 1995, when 16 people comprising of adults and small children were immolated in a star formation at a remote location near St. Pierre de Rennes in France. The horrifying scene was discovered by a gamekeeper on December 23rd, leading to a thorough investigation by Grenoble Gendarmerie Nationale Research Section. Mortifying details emerged stating that all participants, drugged and with plastic bags over their heads, were shot one by one before being set on fire. Fueling further controversy, the investigation discovered 2 mothers among the victims had suffered fatal head injuries. The opportunity of external involvement led the Grenoble public prosecutor to launch a murder and criminal conspiracy investigation. A surprising twist occurred when Edith Bonlou, an Olympian competitor, found among the victims. Adding to the ever-bizarre narrative, investigators unearthed audio recordings of phone conversations between followers, discovered in the ruins of the Salvin Chalet, affirming their shared beliefs. Further events around the sect unfolded when, on March 22, 1997, 5 more suicides were discovered in Quebec. The members chose suicide to reach Sirius by transit before intentionally setting the house on fire. Miraculously, 3 drugged teenagers were discovered, having convinced their parents to spare their lives. The story's investigation concerned the mysterious events that unfolded in Salvin in 1994, where the tragic deaths of 2 leaders and assumed mass suicide of cult members had occurred. Co-accused Michel Tabachnik was singled out as the only culprit, accused of inspiring the mass suicides through his writings and orations to his defense. Tabachnik issued a book, Bach et Messager, dans le Pilier du Temple Solaire, prefaced by Pierre Boulez. Meanwhile, Claude Giron, a group loyalist and a dispenser of prescription drugs, was suspected of providing lethal substances to the group. His case was, however, dismissed in July 1997. As Tabachnik's trial approached, discrepancies began to surface. For instance, the victims' families challenged the suicide theory due to intact surroundings around immolated bodies and zero evidence of fire. The collective suicide account, especially held by Alain Vournay, a victim's kin, seemed unconvincing. Numerous inconsistencies, including trace elements of phosphorus, indicative of a flamethrower, challenged the suicide allegation. The trial convened on April 13, 2001, at a makeshift courtroom in the Grenoble Museum Library. The plaintiffs were, however, divided, with one faction led by Alain Vournay insisting attention be directed toward investigative inconsistencies, whereas the other advocated eradication of cults on the 7th day. Former Ots cohorts testified with a broad spectrum of reactions from disbelief to unwavering fidelity to the cult and its beliefs. In 2006, the public prosecutor implicated Tabachnik, a self-proclaimed spiritual leader, in a series of apparent mass suicides, arguing that his writings had provoked his followers into taking their own lives. The prosecutor appealed against the initial court decision, demanding a retrial. This appeal was supported by plaintiff Alain Varance and his team, who hoped to demonstrate that the investigation conducted by infracted Judge Luc Fontaine was erroneous, arguing instead that the victims were murdered. To prove this, they requested eminent Professor Gilbert Lavoie to search the remains of victims for traces of phosphorus, a chemical element often connected with poison. Despite certain excess quantities of phosphorus being found, this discovery was deemed insufficient to challenge the earlier investigation, and Judge Fontaine's verdict remained unchallenged. Due to the lack of concrete evidence against Tabachnik and his lack of active participation in the cult, the prosecutor did not pressure for any sentence against him, and he was subsequently cleared of charges in December 2006. The cult, known as Ots, was deemed amongst other such organizations as detrimental to society in a 1995 Parliamentary Commission report. The cult's shocking mass suicides, or alleged murders, escalated public fear and encouraged both the French and Swiss governments to monitor all non-mainstream religious entities more closely. American anti-cult movements were also influenced by these events. An examination of this case in a documentary by Yves Boisset questioned how 74 people could die without anyone being held accountable. The documentary challenged the claim of collective suicide and attested towards a mass murder narrative. To further complicate the case, additional family members of the victims and even a journalist, Maurice Fusier, called for a reopening of the case in 2006, presenting a phosphorus assassination theory. Others, such as psychiatrist Jean-Marie Abgral, proposed a political mafia conspiracy theory suggesting ties between the cult's leader Luc Jouret and sketchy individuals of the mafia realm. Filmmaker Yves Boisset took a similar stance and shed light on the overlooked mafia affiliations in his film. The unresolved nature of this case continues to evoke intrigue and speculation amongst the public. In the course of his inquiry, Boisset discovered a connection to the widely publicized Yann Piat case. Piat, who served as a former deputy for the National Front during 1986-1988 and later held a position under the UDEF label for the 3rd VAR constituency till her demise, became fascinated with a real estate project of an Ots member shortly before her violent end, murdered by 2 motorcyclists on February 25, 1994. Offering insight, Arnaud Palisson, formerly of the Direction Centrale des Renseignements Généraux du Courrier, in Paris, proposed that Boisset was sidelined, subjected to the overwhelmingly deceptive arguments of local journalists on a quest for their own Watergate scandal within Vercors region's local politics.